What the hell? He didn't strike her? Roman Bonucci's voice, a sound that had ordered executions without a tremor, fractured through the marble-floored nursery like shattered glass. His hand, tattooed and scarred, hovered instinctively over the beretta holstered beneath his pinstripe jacket. Not to draw it, but because his body didn't know how else to respond to the impossible, to miracles. His son, had just pressed his lips to the soot-stained cheek of a woman who smelled like rain and desperation. But that moment, that unthinkable moment, came after everything Aaliyah Simone had already survived that morning. It began 4 hours earlier. Aaliyah had stood in the alley behind the Bonucci Tower before sunrise, her breath forming white clouds in the November cold. She wore 3 layers of threadbare clothing, none of them enough, and clutched a crumpled flyer advertising temporary cleaning positions. Her hands shook, though she couldn't tell any more if it was from the cold or the hunger that had become her constant companion. The service entrance smelled like bleach and money. She'd knocked 5 times before the door cracked open. Marcus, the building service manager, stood in the doorway with his arms crossed. His uniform was crisp, expensive. Everything hers wasn't. He looked her up and down with the particular kind of disgust reserved for people who reminded him where he'd come from. "You the girl from the agency?" His voice dripped with skepticism. "Yes, sir." She kept her eyes down, respectful, submissive, desperate. "I can start right now. I work hard. I don't complain. We needed someone yesterday." He glanced behind him, then back at her tattered coat. "There's a situation on the top floor, penthouse level, private residence." He paused, letting the weight of those words settle. The nursery. The way he said nursery made it sound like war zone. "The regular staff won't go in there anymore, not after what happened to the last 3 nannies." Marcus pulled a surgical mask from his pocket and held it out like a shield. "Mr. Bonucci's people are particular. You touch nothing except what you are told to clean. You speak to no one. You look at no one, especially not the boy." Aaliyah took the mask with trembling fingers. "And if you survive the morning," Marcus added, his expression somewhere between pity and warning, "maybe we'll talk about making it permanent. Before I continue, tell me where you are watching from in the comments." The service elevator climbed in silence, broken only by the mechanical whir of cables and Aaliyah's shallow breathing. Marcus stood beside her, checking his watch every 30 seconds like he was counting down to a detonation. The elevator walls were mirrored, and Aaliyah caught glimpses of herself between the polished brass fixtures, hollow cheeks, tangled hair barely contained under a donated headscarf, eyes that had learned not to hope for much. "You religious?" Marcus asked suddenly. Sometimes." "Start praying." The doors opened onto a hallway that didn't belong in the same reality as the alley she'd left behind. White marble stretched in both directions, veined with gold. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls. The air itself smelled expensive. Leather, cigars, like something floral that probably cost more than her monthly rent at the shelter. 2 women in black and white uniforms stood outside an ornate door, their faces pale and streaked with tears. One held a tissue to her bleeding lip. The other was shaking so violently her cap had fallen to the floor. "That's them," Marcus muttered. "The nannies. Well, former nannies." A man in a dark suit, not a butler, something sharper, more dangerous, stood with his arms crossed, blocking the door. His jacket couldn't quite hide the shoulder holster. "Mr. Caruso," Marcus said carefully. "This is the replacement from the cleaning service." Caruso's eyes raked over Aaliyah like she was evidence at a crime scene. "Oh, this is what they sent?" "It's all they had on short notice. She looks like she wandered in from a homeless camp." "I can work," Aaliyah said quietly, hating how small her voice sounded. "Please, I just need—" "You need to understand something." Caruso stepped closer, and Aaliyah caught the scent of gun oil and cologne. "The boy in there, he's not like other kids. He doesn't talk. He doesn't play. He attacks. The last nanny, Harvard-educated, spoke 4 languages, cost us 15 grand a month, lasted 45 minutes before he split her eyebrow open with a wooden block." One of the crying women let out a small sob. There was spittle on her collar, Aaliyah realized, and what looked like bite marks on her wrist. "He needs his mother," the woman whispered. "He keeps screaming for his mother." But she's... Enough!" Caruso's voice cracked like a whip. He turned back to Aaliyah. "You go in, you clean up the mess, you get out. You don't touch the boy. You don't talk to the boy. You don't even look at him if you can help it. Mr. Bonucci is watching on the monitors, and if you do anything that compromises his son's safety, you won't make it back to the elevator. Understand?" Aaliyah nodded, though ice was spreading through her chest. Caruso opened the door. The nursery was a war zone, decorated as a paradise. A hand-painted mural of a forest covered one wall, but someone had gouged claw marks through the trees. Toys lay scattered like shrapnel, wooden trains overturned, stuffed animals decapitated, books torn into confetti. A rocking chair lay on its side, one runner snapped clean off. And in the corner, beneath a window that looked out over the glittering city, crouched a small figure in red pajamas. Leo Bonucci was maybe 3 years old, with dark curls and his father's sharp features softened by baby fat. He wasn't crying. He wasn't making any sound at all. He just rocked back and forth, his arms wrapped around his knees, his eyes fixed on nothing. The door clicked shut behind Aaliyah. She stood frozen, suddenly aware of every sound, her breathing, the rustle of her donated coat, the distant hum of the building's ventilation. The boy didn't look at her, didn't acknowledge her existence. Aaliyah had been invisible before. She'd perfected it, actually. The art of being so unremarkable that people's eyes slid past you like you were furniture. But something about this child's emptiness called to her own. She moved slowly, carefully, and began picking up the scattered toys. She didn't speak, didn't hum, didn't do any of the performative cheerfulness she'd seen other adults use around children. She just worked, her movements quiet and methodical, creating order from chaos, one piece at a time. She was reaching for an overturned picture frame when she felt it, the weight of a stare. Leo had turned his head. He was watching her with eyes that were too old, too knowing, too full of grief for someone so small. Aaliyah froze, remembering Caruso's warning, "Don't look at him." But she'd never been good at following rules that felt cruel. She met the boy's gaze and offered something she had no right to promise. "It's okay to be angry." Leo's face crumpled. For a heartbeat, Aaliyah thought he would scream, would throw something, that would prove everyone right about how broken and dangerous he was. Instead, he stood on unsteady legs and walked toward her. Behind the mirror, in the security room, Roman Bonucci rose from his chair, his hand moving toward his weapon on instinct. Leo stopped inches from Aaliyah. He studied her face, the bruise on her jaw from a scuffle at the shelter, the cracked lips, the eyes that understood loss, and then he leaned forward and pressed his lips to her cheek. The kiss was soft, reverent, achingly gentle. In the hallway, Caruso's radio crackled. "Sir? Sir?" What do we do?" Aaliyah knelt slowly, bringing herself to Leo's level. Tears blurred her vision. The boy's small hand reached up and touched her face, tracing the path of a tear like he was memorizing proof that someone else hurt too. The nursery door slammed open. Roman Bonucci filled the doorway like divine judgment in a tailored suit, his presence so absolute that the air pressure seemed to change. His tattooed hands, his granite jaw, his eyes that had witnessed things that would break most men. All of it focused on the impossible tableau before him. His son, touching a stranger. His son, who hadn't let anyone close in 8 months. His son, smiling. Roman Bonucci didn't speak for a full 30 seconds. He simply stared at Aaliyah with the kind of intensity that made her understand why grown men with guns outside called him Sir, in voices that trembled slightly. His jaw worked like he was grinding down words too dangerous to release, and his hands, those scarred, tattooed hands, flexed at his sides in a rhythm that suggested violence was always just beneath his surface. "Out," he said finally, of the word directed at Caruso without breaking eye contact with Aaliyah. "Everyone out. Now." "Sir, I don't think—" "Now." The door closed with a soft click that sounded like a cell locking. Leo had wrapped his small arms around Aaliyah's neck, his face pressed against her shoulder. She could feel his rapid heartbeat through the thin fabric of her shirt, could smell the baby shampoo in his hair, something lavender and expensive that made her throat tight with an emotion she couldn't name. Roman moved closer, each step deliberate, predatory. He stopped 3 feet away, studying them both like a general examining suspicious terrain. "Who sent you?" His voice was quieter now, which somehow made it more terrifying. The cleaning agency. Marcus said, "Don't." He held up one finger. "Don't insult my intelligence. My son hasn't let anyone touch him in 8 months. Not his pediatrician, not his grandmother, not me." Something cracked in his voice on that last word, quickly smoothed over. "Then you walk in wearing rags and smelling like the street, and within 5 minutes he's kissing you like you're his salvation. So I'll ask again, and this time I want the truth. Who the fuck sent you?" Aaliyah's hands trembled against Leo's back. "No one sent me. I'm nobody. I needed work. I've been sleeping in a shelter on 9th Street for 2 months, and they're closing next week for renovations. And I thought if I could just get a job, any job, maybe I could—" She stopped, hating how her voice broke. "I'm not a spy. I'm not anything. I'm just trying to survive." Roman's eyes narrowed. He pulled out his phone, pressed a button. "Caruso, I want a full background on this woman. Every address, every job, every person she's ever known, and I want it in 30 minutes. He ended the call. "If you're lying, if this is some kind of setup by the Rossi family, or the feds, or anyone else with a death wish, I'll know. And you'll disappear so completely that even God won't find your body. I'm not lying. We'll see." He moved to the window, his back to her, silhouetted against the city lights. "In the meantime, you're not leaving. Leo has decided you're important, and I don't disrupt the few things that bring him peace." Aaliyah's breath caught. "What does that mean?" "It means you work for me now." He turned, and there was something calculating in his expression, something that made her feel like a chess piece being moved into position. "I'll pay you $200,000 a year. You'll have a room on this floor, full access to anything you need, food, clothes, medical care. You'll never worry about money or shelter or where your next meal comes from." The numbers didn't make sense. She made $8 an hour cleaning offices. 200,000 was a fortune. It was impossible. "What's the catch?" A ghost of something, respect maybe, flickered across his face. "The catch is you never leave. Not without my permission. Not without a security detail. You become part of this household, which means you become part of my world. And my world is not safe for people like you. People like me? Innocent. He said it like an accusation. You'll see things, hear things. Men will come to this penthouse who've done terrible things, and you'll serve them coffee and smile and say nothing. Or you'll learn to shoot a gun, because everyone under my protection knows how to defend themselves. You'll sleep behind locked doors and never, never trust anyone except me and Caruso. He paused. And in return, you'll give my son what I can't seem to give him. A reason to keep living. The weight of Leo against her chest suddenly felt immense. Do I have a choice? No. Roman's honesty was almost kind. But you can choose to be miserable about it, or you can choose to see this for what it is. The best deal you're ever going to get. 20 minutes later, Aaliyah stood in a bathroom larger than her entire shelter dormitory, staring at a woman in the mirror who couldn't possibly be her. The housekeeper, Dolores, cold-eyed and efficient, had drawn a bath that smelled like jasmine and roses. Her had laid out bottles of shampoo that probably cost more than Aaliyah's last paycheck, had provided a thick white robe that felt like wearing a cloud. The water had run grey at first, then brown, then finally clear. Now Aaliyah's skin was pink and raw from scrubbing. Her hair hung damp and clean past her shoulders, and the bruises and scars she'd hidden under layers of dirt were visible in the merciless light. She looked fragile, breakable, not at all like someone who could survive Roman Bonucci's world. Dolores returned with an armful of silk, a midnight blue blouse, tailored black pants, undergarments that had tags from stores Aaliyah had only seen in magazines. "Mr. Bonucci wants you presentable for dinner," Dolores said, her tone making it clear she thought this was a wasted effort. Or don't embarrass him. The clothes fit perfectly, which meant Roman had guessed her size just by looking at her, a thought that made her skin prickle. She stared at her reflection and saw an imposter, a street girl playing dress-up in a mobster's castle. Leo appeared in the doorway, clutching a stuffed rabbit with one missing ear. He looked at her for a long moment, then held out his small hand. And Aaliyah, dressed in silk, but still feeling like rags beneath, took it. Elena Rossi arrived like a storm dressed in Valentino. Aaliyah heard her before she saw her. The sharp staccato of designer heels on marble, the rustle of expensive fabric, the way the security team's voices changed pitch, became more deferential, more nervous. Even Caruso, who'd threatened to disappear Aaliyah's body just hours ago, straightened his tie. Aaliyah was on the floor of the living room with Leo, building a tower from wooden blocks. The boy had been silent all morning, communicating only through careful placement of each piece, his small face serious with concentration. She'd learned not to fill the silence with chatter. He seemed to prefer the quiet, and truthfully, so did she. "So this is the miracle worker?" The voice was honey poured over razor blades, sweet until you tasted blood. Aaliyah looked up to find a woman who belonged in magazines, on red carpets, anywhere except the real world where normal people lived. Elena Rossi wore a dress the color of fresh arterial blood, her dark hair swept into a chignon that probably required an engineering degree. Diamonds glittered at her throat and ears, catching the afternoon light like tiny knives. She was beautiful the way a serpent was beautiful. You admired it right up until it struck. "You must be Elena," Aaliyah said, keeping her voice neutral. Roman had mentioned her during their tense breakfast that morning, describing her as a complication in the same tone someone might describe a terminal illness. "I must be." Elena's smile didn't reach her eyes as she circled the room, studying Aaliyah the way a jeweler might study a fake diamond. "Though you have me at a disadvantage. I know nothing about you, except that you appeared out of nowhere, and Roman has suddenly decided you're essential to his household." She paused. "Essential to his son." The emphasis on that last word carried implications that made Aaliyah's stomach turn. Leo pressed closer to Aaliyah's side, his small body tense. She put a protective hand on his back. "I'm just here to help with Leo," Aaliyah said carefully. "Just here to help." Elena laughed, the sound crystalline and cruel. "How philanthropic. Tell me, do they teach that level of altruism in homeless shelters, or is it something you picked up on the streets?" The blood drained from Aaliyah's face. Elena had done her homework. Of course she had. "I'm sorry, was that too direct?" Elena moved closer, her perfume, something dark and floral, washing over them. "It's just that I find it fascinating when someone with absolutely no credentials, no references, no breeding whatsoever, manages to position herself in one of the most powerful households in the city." She crouched down, bringing herself eye level with Aaliyah, and her smile sharpened. "Oh, it makes a girl wonder what exactly you're offering that's so valuable." "That's enough." Roman's voice cut through the room like a gunshot. He stood in the doorway, still wearing his suit from whatever meeting he'd just left, his expression carved from granite. "You're in my home, Elena. Remember that." Elena rose gracefully, her smile never wavering. "Roman, darling, I was just getting acquainted with your new... what do we call her? Nanny seems insufficient. Mistress seems premature." She tilted her head. "Pet?" "I call her by her name." Roman crossed the room in 3 strides, positioning himself between Elena and Aaliyah in a way that was both subtle and unmistakable. "Aaliyah is under my protection, which means she's untouchable." "Your protection?" Elena's eyes glittered with something dangerous. "How romantic. Or does your protection extend to thorough background checks? Because I had my people look into Miss Simone in here, and it's remarkable how little exists. No social media, no credit history, no educational records beyond high school dropout." She turned her gaze back to Aaliyah. "It's almost like you're a ghost, or someone very good at hiding." "She's transparent," Roman said, his voice dropping to that quiet register that made smart people afraid. "Her background check came back clean. She's exactly what she appears to be. Someone who needed help, and who happened to be what Leo needed." "What Leo needs," Elena said slowly, "is a proper mother figure. Someone who understands the responsibilities and dangers of this life. Someone with the education to teach him, the connections to protect him, or the breeding to... He needs someone who doesn't make him scream." Roman's words fell like stones. "Everything else is negotiable." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Elena's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something raw and ugly beneath the beauty. Rage, jealousy, humiliation. She recovered quickly, but Aaliyah had seen it. They all had. "The families are expecting an announcement," Elena said, and now her voice carried steel. "Your father promised mine an alliance, a marriage. The Bonucci and Rossi empires united through blood and vow." She gestured dismissively toward Aaliyah. "Not through whatever charitable impulse made you take in strays. My father's promises died with him." Roman's tone left no room for argument. "I make my own deals now." "Then you're making a mistake." Elena adjusted her handbag, her composure fully restored. "This girl, this nobody from nowhere, is a liability. She doesn't understand our world. She can't protect Leo when your enemies come for him. And they will come for him, Roman. They always do." She moved toward the door, then paused. "When that happens, when her ignorance gets your son killed, you'll remember this conversation. You'll remember that I tried to warn you." "Get out!" Elena smiled one last time, sharp, predatory, patient. I'll see myself out, but I'll be back. After all, I'm practically family. Her eyes cut to Aaliyah. Unlike some people. The heels clicked away down the hall, fading into silence. Roman stood frozen for a long moment, his shoulders tight with tension. When he finally turned, his expression was unreadable. She's not wrong about everything. You're a target now. The moment I claimed you were under my protection, you became a piece on the board. Aaliyah's hand was still on Leo's back, feeling his heartbeat slowly return to normal. I didn't ask to be a piece. No. Something almost like regret crossed Roman's face. But you are one anyway, and Elena won't forget this. She's patient, methodical, and she never forgives a slight. He moved to the window, looking out over the city that he ruled from the shadows. Welcome to my world, Aaliyah. I hope you survive it. The teddy bear felt wrong. Aaliyah couldn't explain it. Just a subtle difference in weight when Leo handed it to her during their afternoon routine. She'd been living in the penthouse for 2 weeks now, long enough to learn the rhythms of the household, the weight and texture of Leo's favorite things. This bear, with its button eyes and worn fur, felt heavier than it should. She waited until Leo was napping, then took the bear into her room and locked the door. Her hands trembled as she examined the seams, running her fingers along the stitching until she found it, a small, hard lump in the bear's spine that didn't belong. The surgical scissors from the bathroom kit Roman had provided were sharp enough. She made a careful incision along the back seam and extracted a device, no bigger than a coin. Black plastic, a tiny green light pulsing steadily. She didn't need a degree in surveillance to know what she was looking at. Someone was listening. Her first instinct was to run to Roman, but something made her pause. If someone had planted this in Leo's toy, they'd had access to the nursery, access to the private wing. But that meant security had been compromised, or worse, someone on the inside was working against them. Against her. She thought of Dolores, who still looked at her with barely concealed contempt, of Marcus, who'd made it clear she didn't belong, of the rotating staff who whispered in corners and went silent when she entered rooms. She'd assumed it was normal prejudice, the beggar girl who'd stumbled into luxury. But maybe it was something more calculated. Aaliyah wrapped the device in a washcloth and slipped it into her pocket. Then she began paying attention to the things she'd been too overwhelmed to notice before. The coffee that tasted bitter 3 mornings in a row, leaving her nauseated and dizzy. The way her clothes sometimes smelled of perfume she'd never worn. Elena's perfume. Or the locked doors she'd found throughout the penthouse that should have been open according to Roman's instructions. Small things. Deliberate things. Things designed to make her look unstable, incompetent, untrustworthy. That evening, while Leo played with his blocks in the living room under Caruso's watchful eye, Aaliyah found Roman in his study. He sat behind a mahogany desk that probably cost more than a car, reviewing documents with the focused intensity of a man who knew one wrong signature could mean death. She placed the device on the desk in front of him. Roman's eyes went cold. Where? Leo's teddy bear, the brown one with the missing ear. She watched his jaw tighten. How long has Elena had ears in the nursery? Elena. He picked up the device, turning it over in his scarred hands. Oh, you're certain? Someone's been sabotaging me. Little things, spoiled food, moved belongings, locked doors. They want you to think I'm careless, unstable, and who benefits most from you losing faith in me. Roman was quiet for a long moment, studying her with an expression she couldn't read. Then he pressed a button on his desk. Caruso. My office. Now. Within minutes, Caruso arrived, took one look at the device, and went pale. Sir, I sweep the residence weekly. This shouldn't have... But it did. Roman's voice was deadly calm. Which means someone on the inside planted it after your sweeps. Someone with access to the private wing. He leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled. Find them. I don't care if you have to interrogate every staff member personally. Find them and bring them to me. Caruso left quickly, the device in an evidence bag. Aaliyah started to follow, but Roman's voice stopped her. Wait. She turned. He stood, moved to a cabinet against the wall, and opened it to reveal something that made her breath catch. An arsenal. Handguns, rifles, ammunition boxes, neatly labeled and stacked. He selected a matte black pistol, smaller than the others, and held it out to her. If they're willing to plant surveillance in my son's toys, he said quietly, they're willing to do worse, and I can't be with you every moment. He saw her hesitation. Take it. I don't know how to use a gun. I know. That's why I'm going to teach you. He moved to the door, locked it, then gestured for her to follow him to the far end of the study, where thick curtains concealed a reinforced wall. This is soundproofed. Oh, no one will hear. The gun was heavier than she expected, cold and solid in her palm. Roman stood behind her, close enough that she could feel the heat of him, smell the cedar and smoke that clung to his clothes. His hands covered hers, adjusting her grip, his voice low and patient in her ear. Finger off the trigger until you're ready to fire. Both hands. Sight alignment. Front sight, rear sight, target. Breathe out slowly. Then squeeze. She could feel his heartbeat against her back, steady and strong. Could feel the controlled violence in his movements, the carefully leashed power that made him so dangerous. This close, he was overwhelming, not just physically, but in the way he commanded space, attention, gravity itself. Why are you doing this? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. His hands tightened fractionally over hers. Not because keeping Leo safe means keeping you safe, and I protect what's mine. The possessiveness in those words should have frightened her. Instead, it felt like the first secure thing in her entire life. I'm not yours, she said, but there was no conviction in it. Tell yourself that if it helps. His breath was warm against her ear. But Eleanor's people are watching you, waiting for you to slip up or disappear. The only reason you're still alive is because I've made it clear that touching you means war. He stepped back slightly, giving her space. Now, fire! The recoil shocked through her arms, the sound muffled, but still powerful. The bullet hit the reinforced wall 6 inches left of center. Again. They practiced until her arms ached and her ears rang despite the soundproofing. Roman corrected her stance, her breathing, her tendency to anticipate the recoil. He was patient in a way she hadn't expected. This man who ordered executions and ruled through fear was teaching her to shoot with the careful attention of someone who genuinely wanted her to survive. By the end, she could hit center mass 3 times out of 5. Better, Roman said, taking the gun and securing it. You'll practice every day. With me or with Caruso? He pulled out a small holster, fitted for the weapon. Keep this on you. Always. Under your clothes where Leo won't see it. Aaliyah took the holster, feeling its weight. Do you really think it'll come to that? Roman's eyes met hers, and in them she saw truth without mercy. I think Elena won't stop until she's destroyed everything she perceives as a threat to her claim on this family. And right now, that means you. He moved closer, and there was something almost tender in his expression, a crack in the armor. But I meant what I said. You're under my protection, and I've never lost anything I've decided to keep. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. In the living room, Leo called out. Not words, but a sound that meant he'd woken and wanted Aaliyah. She turned to go, but Roman caught her wrist, his grip gentle but firm. Aaliyah, the people who planted that device? When Caruso finds them, I'm going to make an example. You need to understand what that means in my world. She met his gaze. I understand. Do you? He searched her face. Because there's no going back from this. Once you see what I'm capable of, you can't unsee it. She thought of Leo's small hand in hers, of the impossible gentleness in that kiss, that of the first place she'd felt safe in years. Then I'll learn to live with it. Something shifted in Roman's expression. Respect, perhaps, or recognition. He released her wrist. As she left to comfort Leo, Aaliyah felt the weight of the holster against her ribs, a reminder that she'd crossed another threshold. She wasn't just a nanny anymore, wasn't just a charity case he'd taken in. She was a piece on the board, armed and dangerous. And Eleanor Rossi had made the fatal mistake of teaching her to play. Leo's pediatric appointment was scheduled for Tuesday at 10, a routine checkup at a private clinic in the financial district that catered exclusively to families who valued discretion over insurance networks. While Roman had been called away to handle a situation at the docks, something about a shipment and a dead informant, which meant the security detail fell to Caruso and two other men Aaliyah had learned to recognize, Vincent, who had kind eyes and a scar across his throat, and Marco, young and eager to prove himself. The armored SUV smelled like leather and gun oil. Leo sat beside Aaliyah in his car seat, clutching the repaired teddy bear, minus its surveillance device, and staring out the tinted windows at the city passing by. She'd dressed him in soft clothes that wouldn't irritate his skin during the examination, had packed his favorite snacks, had done everything the expensive parenting books in Roman's library suggested. She'd also worn the holster. The weight of the pistol against her ribs had become familiar over the past week, as a constant reminder that she lived in a world where pediatric appointments required armed escorts. Roman had made her practice every morning, her accuracy improving until she could hit center mass 7 times out of 10. Caruso had seemed grudgingly impressed. The clinic occupied the top floor of a steel and glass building that probably housed hedge funds and law firms. They parked in the private garage, and Caruso's radio crackled with confirmation from the advance team that the route was clear. Standard protocol, Caruso said, meeting Aaliyah's eyes in the rearview mirror. Vincent takes point. Marco covers rear. I stay with you and the boy. We move fast. We move together. And if I say run, you run. Understood? Aaliyah nodded, her mouth dry. They exited the vehicle in a choreographed formation, Leo's small hand tight in hers. The garage was quiet, except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant rumble of traffic. Their footsteps echoed on concrete as they moved toward the elevator bay. Vincent reached the elevator first, pressed the call button, and turned to give the all-clear signal. The explosion wasn't loud, more of a pneumatic hiss. But suddenly, Vincent was on the ground, red blooming across his white shirt. Aaliyah's mind took a second to process what her eyes were seeing. A dart, not a bullet. Vincent clawing at his neck as his body convulsed. Down! Caruso's hand was on her shoulder, forcing her behind the SUV as gunfire erupted. Real bullets this time, sparking off metal, shattering glass. Marco returned fire, his young face transformed into something hard and lethal. Leo wasn't crying. That was the thing that terrified Aaliyah most. He'd gone completely silent, his eyes wide and blank, his small body rigid with trauma. She pulled him against her chest, shielding him with her body as bullets punched holes in the SUV's panels. "They're coming from the stairwell and the elevator!" Marco shouted over the gunfire. "We're pinned!" Caruso was on his radio, his voice clipped and professional despite the chaos. "Code black. South Garage, we need backup now. Vincent's down. Unknowns with automatic weapons. They knew our route. A grenade rolled across the concrete, small and black and inevitable. Time became elastic. Aaliyah saw Caruso's eyes widen, saw him calculate trajectories and blast radius, saw him make a decision. He grabbed Marco and dove left, away from the SUV, away from her and Leo, to drawing the explosion away from the boy. Aaliyah understood in that crystalline moment what Roman's protection meant. These men would die for Leo without hesitation. The question was whether she would do the same. She didn't think. She grabbed Leo and ran, not toward safety, but toward the narrow space between two concrete pillars, the only cover within reach. The grenade detonated behind them with a sound that was less noise and more pressure, a wall of force that picked her up and threw her forward. She twisted mid-air, taking the impact on her shoulder and back. Leo crushed against her chest, but protected, always protected. Pain exploded up her spine. Couldn't breathe, couldn't hear anything except ringing. The world was smoke and shadows and the smell of burning rubber. Footsteps approaching. Multiple attackers, moving with military precision. She could see their silhouettes through the smoke. 3 men, weapons raised, searching for targets, searching for Leo. Aaliyah's hand found the pistol. Her fingers were numb, clumsy, but Roman's training was muscle memory now. Safety off. Both hands. Sight alignment. The first man emerged from the smoke, his weapon sweeping toward where she crouched. She fired twice, center mass, exactly as Roman had taught her. The man staggered, surprised, and went down. The other 2 opened fire immediately, bullets chewing through concrete inches from her head. Leo made a small sound against her chest, not a cry, just a whimper, and something primal and violent surged through Aaliyah's veins. She fired again and again, not aiming with precision now, but with desperation, creating enough chaos to make them take cover. But the slide locked back, empty. She'd burned through the entire magazine. The attackers knew it. She could see them communicating with hand signals, flanking her position. She had maybe 10 seconds before they had a clean shot. 10 seconds to decide if she'd die here, covering a child who wasn't hers, or if she'd surrender him to save herself. It wasn't even a choice. Aaliyah curled her body tighter around Leo, making herself the only target, and closed her eyes. The gunfire that erupted was deafening, but it wasn't aimed at her. She looked up to see Roman Bonucci striding through the smoke like an avenging angel in a blood-spattered suit, a rifle in his hands, his face a mask of controlled fury. Behind him, a dozen armed men fanned out in tactical formation. The 2 remaining attackers died before they could retreat. Roman was beside her in seconds, his hands on her face, checking for injuries, his eyes wild with something that might have been fear. "Are you hit? Aaliyah, look at me. Are you hit?" "Leo," she managed, her voice raw. "Check Leo." Roman took his son carefully, examining him with practiced efficiency. No blood, no injuries, just shock and trauma that would require therapy. But he was alive. He was alive because Aaliyah had chosen to be his shield. "She's bleeding," Caruso said, appearing from the smoke with a gash across his forehead. Marco was with him, limping but functional. "Her back? I know." Roman's voice was strange, tight with emotion he was fighting to control. He lifted Aaliyah's shirt carefully, and she felt his sharp intake of breath. "Shrapnel. We need a hospital." "No hospitals," Aaliyah forced the words out. "Too exposed. Or Elena will—" "Fuck Elena." Roman gathered her into his arms, cradling her like she weighed nothing. "You took shrapnel for my son. You emptied your weapon defending him when you could have run. You—" His voice broke, just slightly. "You stayed." Aaliyah's vision was getting hazy at the edges. shock and blood loss catching up. He kissed my cheek, she whispered. I couldn't let them. I know. Roman's arms tightened around her, and when she looked up at his face, she saw something she hadn't expected. Tears barely contained in the eyes of a man who ruled through fear. I know, Aaliyah. I know. As consciousness slipped away, her last thought was of Leo's small hand finding hers, holding on tight, refusing to let go even as Roman carried them both toward the waiting vehicles. She'd survived. They'd both survived. And Elena Rossi had just made her biggest mistake. She'd proven to Roman Bonucci that Aaliyah wasn't a liability. She was the only person in his empire he could trust. If you are still here, I need you to subscribe for more tales like this and hit that like button so this video reaches more people who need to hear it. The Dr. Roman kept on retainer-stitched Aaliyah's back in the penthouse's medical room, 14 pieces of shrapnel extracted, and 23 sutures placed with the kind of clinical precision that came from treating gunshot wounds more often than skiing accidents. The painkillers made everything soft and distant, but she refused to sleep until she saw Leo. Roman brought him to her bedside, and the boy curled against her uninjured side, finally crying, great shuddering sobs that shook his small frame. While she recovered for 3 days, Roman working from a laptop in the chair beside her bed, leaving only for the most urgent business. Leo slept in a cot nearby, refusing to be separated from her. It should have been suffocating, this constant surveillance, but instead it felt like safety. On the 4th day, when Aaliyah could walk without gasping, Roman allowed her back to her own room. Dolores had changed the sheets and left fresh clothes folded on the dresser. Everything was exactly as it should be, except for the velvet box on her nightstand that hadn't been there before. Aaliyah stared at it for a long moment, her instincts screaming danger. She should call Roman, should leave it untouched, should do anything except what she did, which was open it with trembling fingers. The necklace inside was obscene in its beauty, or emeralds the size of her thumbnail surrounded by diamonds, set in platinum that caught the afternoon light and threw green fire across the walls, the kind of piece that belonged in museums or around the throats of women who summered in Monaco, the kind of piece that someone would notice was missing. She was still staring at it when her door burst open. Roman entered first, his face carved from stone, followed by an older man in an expensive suit whom Aaliyah had seen once before. Salvatore Conte, Roman's consigliere, the man who whispered in his ear about strategy and tradition and the old ways of doing things. Behind them, Elena Rossi, wearing widow's black and the expression of theatrical concern. There, Elena said softly, pointing at the box. Exactly where I said it would be. Roman's eyes met Aaliyah's, and she saw the question there, the desperate hope that this was somehow a misunderstanding. I didn't, Aaliyah started, but Salvatore cut her off. That necklace belonged to Roman's mother. His voice was granite and authority, the voice of a man who'd helped build an empire. It's been in the Bonucci family for 4 generations. It was kept in the master bedroom vault, behind a lock that requires both a code and a fingerprint. He turned to Roman. Only 3 people have access to that vault. You, me, and Caruso. Then someone else opened it, Aaliyah said, hating how her voice shook. Someone who wanted to frame me. How convenient. Elena moved closer, her heels clicking on hardwood. The street girl finds priceless family jewelry in her room and immediately claims she's being framed. She looked at Roman, her expression perfectly calibrated. Sorrowful, disappointed, vindicated. I warned you, darling. I told you she was a plant. The feds, the Morellis, whoever's paying her. They sent her here to get close to you, to steal intelligence and leverage. The child was just her way in. That's not true. Aaliyah took a step toward Roman, saw him tense. Roman, you know me. You know I would never... Do I? His voice was quiet, dangerous. I know you appeared from nowhere with a conveniently tragic story. I know my son bonded with you impossibly fast. I know you've had access to every room in this penthouse for weeks. He gestured at the necklace. And I know my mother's jewelry is in your possession. Because someone put it there. Who? Salvatore's question was sharp. The staff is loyal, vetted, most of them here for years. Caruso's been with this family since Roman was in diapers. Or you're the only unknown variable. He turned to Roman, his voice hardening. The old laws are clear. Theft from the family is punishable by death. It doesn't matter if she saved the boy. She betrayed your trust, and the organization needs to see justice done. No. Roman's word cracked like a whip. I won't execute her based on circumstantial evidence. Then exile her. Elena's voice was silk and poison. Send her back to the streets where you found her. Let the families know you dealt with the traitor swiftly. She paused. Or your enemies will wonder if you've gone soft, if your judgment is compromised by sentiment. The weight of those words hung in the air. In Roman's world, perceived weakness was a death sentence. Leaders who let emotion override strategy didn't stay leaders long. They ended up in shallow graves. Roman stared at the necklace, his jaw working, his hands flexing at his sides in that rhythm that meant violence was close to the surface. When he finally spoke, his voice was empty of everything except authority. Caruso. The security chief appeared in the doorway immediately, as if he'd been waiting for this exact moment. Take Aaliyah to the holding room. No one sees her. No one speaks to her until I've completed a full investigation. The holding room. Aaliyah had heard whispers about it. A soundproofed cell in the building's sub-basement where Roman questioned people who couldn't be taken to secondary locations. People who sometimes didn't come back up. Roman, please. She reached for him, and he flinched back like she'd pulled a weapon. Don't. His eyes were glacial now, the warmth she'd seen after the ambush completely extinguished. Don't say my name. Don't touch me. Don't do anything except exactly what Caruso tells you. What about Leo? Her voice broke. He needs me. He'll think I abandoned him. Leo is my concern, not yours. Roman turned his back on her, addressing Salvatore. I want a full audit of everyone who entered the vault room in the last month. I want lie detector tests for the entire staff. You want to believe she's innocent. Elena's observation was almost gentle. I understand, truly. She played her part well. The wounded bird, the selfless protector. But Roman, darling, you can't afford to be deceived. Not by her, not by anyone. Caruso's hand was on Aaliyah's arm, not rough but inexorable. She let him lead her toward the door, but at the threshold, she turned back, to catching Roman's profile. I know you don't believe me right now, she said, her voice steady, despite the terror crawling up her spine. But I didn't take that necklace. And when you find out who really did, when you realize Elena played you like she's been playing everyone else. She paused, letting the weight settle. I hope you can forgive yourself for this. Roman didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge her words, just stood there between Elena and Salvatore, a king in his castle, making the hardest decision of his life. Caruso walked her to the service elevator, not the one that went up, but the one that went down into the dark. The doors closed, and through the narrowing gap, Aaliyah caught one last glimpse of the penthouse lights, warm and golden and impossibly far away. The holding room was exactly what she expected. Concrete walls, a metal cot, a toilet in the corner, and a single bulb that never turned off. No windows, no sound except her own breathing. She sat on the cot, feeling the stitches pull in her back, and tried not to think about what came next. Execution or exile, Salvatore had said. Death or abandonment. Neither option included Leo, included the strange, broken family she'd somehow become part of. The door's lock was electronic, controlled from outside. Even if she could pick it, which she couldn't, there would be guards. There was no escape. So Aaliyah did the only thing she could. She lay down on the cot, closed her eyes, and waited for Roman Bonucci to decide if she lived or died. Leo stopped eating on the second day. The Roman tried everything, the expensive organic meals the nutritionist recommended, the simple pasta Leo had loved as an infant, even the juice boxes Aaliyah had introduced despite their sugar content. The boy turned his head away from each offering, his small mouth clamped shut, his eyes fixed on the nursery door as if willing it to open and reveal the person he wanted. On the third day, he stopped sleeping. Roman sat in the rocking chair through the night, his son rigid in his arms, staring at nothing with eyes that had gone frighteningly blank. It was like watching Leo disappear, retreating back into that unreachable place he'd inhabited before Aaliyah arrived. By the fourth day, the screaming started. Not words. Leo still didn't speak, but sounds that tore from his throat like they were ripping him apart from the inside. He threw himself against the walls, clawed at his own face, bit his arms hard enough to draw blood. The pediatrician came and went, prescribing sedatives that Roman refused to authorize. He wouldn't drug his son into compliance. He wouldn't make Leo's pain more convenient. But he was watching his child self-destruct, and he didn't know how to stop it. It was Caruso who finally said what everyone was thinking. They stood in Roman's study at 3 a.m, Leo finally exhausted into fitful sleep in the next room, and the security chief's face was drawn with something that looked like guilt. "She didn't take the necklace, sir." Roman's hands tightened on his whiskey glass. "The evidence can be planted. You know that better than anyone." Caruso moved to the window, his shoulders tense. "I've run this organization's security for 15 years. I know how to read people, how to spot liars and infiltrators. That girl?" He shook his head. "She's exactly what she appears to be. Someone who got lucky and is terrified of losing it." "Then who put the necklace in her room?" "Someone with access and motive. Someone who benefits from her disappearance." Caruso's meaning was clear without him saying the name. Roman drained his glass, feeling the burn. He'd spent 4 days investigating, running background checks, reviewing security footage, interviewing staff. Everything came back clean, which itself was suspicious. In his experience, perfect alibis usually meant professional work. "If I bring her back, and she is a plot," quietly, "if this is all theater and I'm the fool, the organization will see weakness. Not they'll question my judgment. Some will see opportunity. And if you don't bring her back," Caruso gestured toward the nursery, "how long before Leo hurts himself badly enough that no doctor can fix it? How long before you lose him because you were too proud to admit you might be wrong?" The words hit like physical blows. Roman set down his glass and walked out of the study, down the private elevator, past the startled guards, into the sub-basement where the holding room waited. He unlocked the door himself, the electronic mechanism clicking open with a finality that felt like crossing a threshold he couldn't uncross. Aaliyah sat on the metal cot, her back against the concrete wall, and she looked so small in that harsh light, diminished, hollowed out, but not broken. Her eyes met his, and he saw no accusation there, just exhaustion and a terrible, aching sadness. "Is Leo okay?" Her first words. Not about her imprisonment or her innocence or her fear. About his son. Roman's throat tightened. No. He told her everything. The refusing food, The sleeplessness, the self-harm that had left bruises and bite marks across Leo's small arms. He watched her face crumple with each detail, watched tears slip down her cheeks that she didn't bother to wipe away. "I should have fought harder," she whispered. "Should have made you listen. I should have believed you." Roman moved closer, every step feeling like pulling against gravity. The evidence was too perfect, too convenient. I was so afraid of being deceived that I couldn't see I was being manipulated. By Elena. By Elena. He sat on the cot beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. Like she played me, used my paranoia, my need to protect Leo, turned it into a weapon against the one person who actually cared about him. Aaliyah was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You can still send me away. Tell the families I stole from you. Maintain your authority. Just let me say goodbye to Leo first. Let me explain so he knows I didn't choose to leave. I'm not sending you away." Roman turned to face her fully, seeing the confusion in her eyes. "I'm taking you home. Back to the penthouse. Back to Leo." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and when she didn't, he wiped the tears from her cheeks with his thumb. "Back to where you belong. Your consigliere will say you're making a mistake." "My consigliere doesn't see what I see." Roman's hand lingered on her face, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "You took shrapnel for my son. You could have run during that ambush, could have saved yourself, but you stayed. You made yourself his shield." His voice dropped. "No one has ever done that. Not for money, not for loyalty, not for anything. Just you." "He kissed my cheek," Aaliyah said, echoing the words she'd spoken before. How could I not protect him? Something broke in Roman's chest. Some wall he'd built after his wife's murder, after he'd learned that everyone could be bought or threatened or broken. But this woman, this impossible woman who'd stumbled into his life wearing rags and desperation, had proven that some things couldn't be corrupted. Some things were just good. "I don't deserve you," he said, the admission raw. "Neither of us do, me or Leo. We're darkness and violence and everything wrong with this world. Yet you should run from us." "I don't want to run." Aaliyah's hand found his, her fingers threading through his scarred knuckles. "I want to stay, even if it's dangerous. Even if Elena tries again, I want—" She stopped, searching for words. Roman closed the distance between them, his forehead resting against hers. "Say it. I want this. You, Leo, this broken, dangerous family." She lifted her eyes to his, and in them he saw truth without disguise. "I want to belong somewhere." He kissed her then, not with the calculated seduction he'd used on countless women in his past, but with something desperate and genuine, a drowning man finding air. She tasted like salt tears and concrete dust, and somehow still like hope. Her hands found his face, pulling him closer, and for a moment the holding room dissolved. The violence, the empire, and the enemies at the gates, all of it faded into background noise. There was just this, just them. Just the impossible truth that a Mafia don and a homeless girl had found something neither knew they needed. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Roman pressed one more kiss to her forehead. "Elena will retaliate when she realizes I'm bringing you back. This isn't over. I know. She'll try to hurt you, to hurt Leo, and I'll have to hurt her first, which means war with the Rossi family." He searched her face. "Are you sure you want to stay for that?" Aaliyah stood, pulling him up with her, even in the harsh light of the cell, even exhausted and frightened. She looked stronger than she had 4 days ago. I've lived through worse than Elena Rossi, and I survived." She squeezed his hand. "Now let's go get your son." They rode the elevator up together, Roman's hand never leaving hers, and when the doors opened to the penthouse, Leo was there, as if he'd sensed her return. He'd escaped from Caruso's supervision somehow, was standing in the hallway in his pajamas, his face streaked with tears. Aaliyah dropped to her knees, and Leo ran into her arms with a force that nearly knocked her over. He wrapped himself around her like he was afraid she'd disappear. And finally, he spoke. One word, broken and beautiful. "Mama." Roman watched them, his son and this woman who'd chosen them despite every reason to run, and he understood that whatever came next, whatever Elena threw at them, and whatever the families whispered, he would burn the world down before he let anyone separate them again. The gala of the 5 families happened once a year, a glittering spectacle of old money and older sins held at the Venetian ballroom downtown. It was theatre, really. Rival dons in tuxedos pretending civility, their wives dripping in jewels that had been paid for in blood, everyone smiling and lying and calculating who would still be alive by next year's gathering. Attendance wasn't optional. It was a show of strength, a promise that the old alliances still held. Roman had tried to leave Leo at the penthouse with Aaliyah and a skeleton security crew. The boy had screamed himself sick at the separation, clinging to Aaliyah with a desperation that made Roman's chest ache. In the end, he'd made the call that would haunt him. He brought them both. Aaliyah would stay in the private family suite upstairs with Leo, away from the gala itself, with Caruso and 4 armed guards. No one would know they were there. No one would have access. It should have been safe. Aaliyah wore the midnight blue dress Roman had bought her, the one that made her look like she belonged in his world, and watched through the suite's monitor as the ballroom filled with people who would murder her without hesitation if they knew her background. She recognized Elena immediately. Impossible not to, in a gown of blood-red silk that probably cost more than a car, her hair swept up to showcase the diamond collar at her throat. Leo played with his blocks on the carpet, building towers and knocking them down, comfortable in the routine they'd established. While Caruso stood by the door, his hand never far from his weapon, his eyes scanning the monitors with professional paranoia. "Mr. Bonucci is making his entrance," one of the guards said, pointing at the screen. Roman moved through the ballroom like a king, and Aaliyah's heart clenched watching him. He wore violence, like other men wore cologne, subtle but unmistakable, drawing eyes and fear in equal measure. Elena intercepted him immediately, her hand on his arm, leaning in to whisper something that made his jaw tighten. 30 minutes later, the power went out. Not gradually, not with warning, just sudden, absolute darkness. The monitors went black. The suite's lights died. Even the emergency backup systems that should have activated immediately stayed dark. "Protocol," Caruso snapped, his voice cutting through the sudden chaos. "Or to everyone on the principal, weapons out. We move to the—" The door exploded inward, not with explosives, just the force of multiple bodies hitting it simultaneously. Men poured in, wearing waitstaff uniforms and carrying weapons that definitely didn't belong in a catering crew. Caruso fired twice, dropping the first 2, but there were too many, moving with military precision in the dark. Aaliyah grabbed Leo and ran, not toward the exit they'd blocked, but toward the bathroom, the only room with a lock. She slammed the door, threw the bolt, and heard the immediate impact of bodies against wood. It wouldn't hold long, the window, small, reinforced glass, 3 stories up. She could break it, but then what? Leo couldn't survive that fall, and neither could she. Through the door, she heard Caruso still fighting. Gunshots, shouts. or the wet sound of violence. And then silence. Terrible silence. A voice, muffled but clear. "The boy. Where's the boy?" Aaliyah looked around the bathroom with desperate speed. Marble counters, a shower, a ventilation grate near the ceiling. Not big enough for her, but maybe. She climbed onto the counter, pulled the grate free with shaking hands, and lifted Leo toward the opening. He was crying, silently now, tears streaming down his face. But he understood. Somehow, at 3 years old, traumatized and terrified, he understood that she was trying to save him. "Crawl forward," she whispered. "Stay quiet. Mama's coming." The lie tasted like ash, but it calmed him. He squeezed into the vent just as the bathroom door splintered. 2 men entered, guns drawn. Aaliyah stood on the counter, empty-handed, and raised her hands in surrender. "He's not here." "We heard you talking to someone." "Myself, I was praying." She kept her voice steady, watching their eyes. "You can search. He's not here." They did search, roughly, efficiently, finding nothing. One spoke into his radio. "Suite is clear. No sign of the target. She must have moved him before we breached." "Bring her." The response crackled back. "The boss wants to talk to her." They zip-tied her hands and marched her down the servants' stairwell, past Caruso's body. He'd taken 5 of them with him, Aaliyah noted with bitter pride, and into the service corridors that ran like arteries behind the ballroom's glamorous facade. Elena waited in a storage room, converted to a makeshift command center, still wearing her red gown, though now she'd added a radio headset that ruined the aesthetic. She smiled when she saw Aaliyah, a genuine pleasure lighting her face. There she is, the little beggar who thought she could play queen. Elena circled her slowly. "Where's the boy?" "Safe from you." The slap came fast, rocking Aaliyah's head back. She tasted blood but stayed standing. "Let me explain something about leverage," Elena said, her voice conversational despite the violence. "I was going to take Leo, hold him somewhere Roman would never find him, and trade his safe return for a wedding ring. A merger of families, sealed in blood and vow, exactly as it should be." She pulled out a knife, small, elegant, wickedly sharp. "But you've complicated that plan. So now I'm going to cut pieces off you until you tell me where he is. And then I'll kill you. Take him anyway. No, and tell Roman you died trying to kidnap his son yourself." The knife traced a line down Aaliyah's cheek, not cutting yet, just promising. Last chance. "Where?" The ventilation grate above their heads crashed open. Leo Bonucci, 3 years old and terrified, tumbled out directly onto Elena's head with a force that sent them both sprawling. The knife clattered across concrete. Aaliyah moved. Hand still zip-tied, she threw herself at the nearest guard, head-butting him in the throat with everything she had. He went down gagging. She grabbed his gun awkwardly, finger barely reaching the trigger with her hands bound. "Nobody move!" Her voice cracked with adrenaline and desperation, but the weapon's authority made up for it. Elena struggled to her feet, blood streaming from her nose where Leo's elbow had connected. "You stupid girl! What do you think one gun against my entire team is going to—" "Not her team!" The voice came from the doorway, cold and absolutely lethal. "Mine!" Roman Bonucci stood flanked by a dozen armed men, and his face was death itself. Behind him, Aaliyah could see other faces, important faces, Don faces from families whose names carried weight, witnesses. "I followed the power outage," Roman said, his eyes never leaving Eleanor. "Funny thing about cutting electricity in a building this old. It triggers alerts that go straight to the fire department. And the police." He stepped into the room. "And me. I came down here expecting an attack from outside our organization." Imagine my surprise when I found one of our supposed allies orchestrating a kidnapping. Roman, this isn't, Elena started, but he held up one hand. There are rules, he said quietly. Even in our world, there are lines we don't cross. Harming children, betraying alliances, attacking during a gala where we've all promised peace. He looked at the other dons in the doorway. She violated all three, in front of witnesses. What does our law say about traitors? Salvatore Conti stepped forward, his face grave. The penalty is death or exile, decided by vote of the assembled families. The vote took 30 seconds. Elena Rossi, who'd thought herself untouchable through birthright and beauty, learned that even privilege had limits when you threatened a child. Roman crossed the room to Aaliyah, cutting her zip ties with Eleanor's fallen knife. Leo ran to them, and Roman scooped him up, holding both of them close enough that Aaliyah could feel his heartbeat thundering. You saved him, Roman said into her hair. What again? He saved me, she whispered back, looking at Leo. Brave boy. So brave. Eleanor was dragged away, still screaming threats, still insisting she'd done nothing wrong, still believing the world owed her everything. The other families melted back into the party, already spinning the story in their heads, already calculating new alliances now that the Rossi position was weakened. Roman lifted Aaliyah's chin, studied the cut on her cheek, the bruises forming. No more separations. Where I go, you both go. Where you go, my protection follows. He looked toward the assembled witnesses. Let everyone see. Let them all know. This woman is family now. Under my name. Under my protection. His voice carried absolute authority. Anyone who touches her answers to me. The war with the Rossi family lasted 3 weeks and ended with fire. The Roman didn't believe in half measures or drawn-out conflicts that bled resources and created opportunities for other families to exploit weakness. He moved with surgical precision, cutting off their smuggling routes, turning their allies, exposing corruption that even other criminals found distasteful. When Rossi soldiers retaliated by bombing one of Roman's warehouses, he responded by burning 3 of theirs to the ground and leaving a message written in ash, "You touched my family." Elena herself was given a choice, as tradition demanded. Exile to Europe with nothing but the clothes on her back, or a quick death that would at least preserve her family's dignity. She chose exile, still defiant, still believing she'd somehow reclaim her position. Roman watched her plane take off from a private airstrip and felt nothing. Not satisfaction, or not mercy, just the cold certainty that she'd never threaten Leo or Aaliyah again. The Rossi patriarch, Elena's father, tried to sue for peace after 2 weeks. Roman met him in a neutral warehouse, just the 2 of them and their consigliere, and delivered terms that weren't negotiable. The Rossi family would cede their waterfront operations, pay reparations for the attack on Leo, and publicly acknowledge their daughter's treason. In return, Roman would stop destroying them. "You're demanding we commit economic suicide," the old man said, his voice shaking with rage and humiliation. "I'm letting you survive," Roman replied. "That's more mercy than you showed when you raised a daughter who thought kidnapping children was acceptable strategy." The treaty was signed in blood, not metaphorically, but with actual blood drawn from both patriarchs' palms and mixed in a glass of wine that neither drank. Old world tradition for an old world crime. By the 4th week, it was over. The Rossi family would never regain their former power, would spend generations rebuilding what Elena's ambition had cost them. The other families watched and learned. Roman Bonucci's weakness wasn't his son or the woman he protected. His weakness was believing he had any weaknesses at all. The formal introduction happened on a Sunday at the Bonucci estate in the countryside, where the family gathered once a month for dinner and business. Aaliyah had been to the penthouse gatherings before, but always in the background, serving coffee, managing Leo, invisible in the way staff were meant to be invisible. This time, Roman brought her through the front entrance on his arm, with Leo between them holding both their hands. The room went silent. 30 members of the extended Bonucci family, soldiers and captains and distant cousins who lived off the empire's profits, all stopped talking mid-sentence to stare at the woman in the emerald dress. Not the stolen necklace, but a new piece Roman had commissioned, designed specifically for her. Salvatore Conti stood, and the room understood this was official business. The head of our family wishes to make an announcement. Roman's hand tightened briefly on Aaliyah's, a moment of private reassurance before public declaration. Then he addressed the room with the same authority he used to order executions. Most of you have heard rumors about the woman who saved my son. Some of you have questioned my judgment in keeping her close, in elevating someone with no family connections, no history in our world. He paused, letting the weight settle. Let me be clear, Aaliyah Simone is not my employee. She's not a convenience or a phase. She is my partner, my son's mother in every way that matters, and as of today, she carries the Bonucci name and all the protection it provides. Murmurs rippled through the room, shock, disapproval, calculation, but no one spoke against it. Not after what happened to Elena. Not after they'd seen what Roman would do to protect this woman. Anyone who disrespects her disrespects me, Roman continued, his voice dropping to that dangerous quiet. Anyone who threatens her signs their own death warrant. But anyone who questions her place in this family can leave now and never return. No one moved. An older woman, Roman's aunt, Aaliyah had learned, stood slowly. She studied Aaliyah for a long moment, then nodded once. Welcome to the family, child. God help you. It was permission, or close enough. The rest of the family followed suit, some genuine in their acceptance, others performing it convincingly enough. Aaliyah would learn to tell the difference eventually, would develop the instincts necessary to navigate this dangerous world. But for now, she simply stood beside Roman and tried not to tremble. Leo, bored with adult proceedings, tugged on her hand. Mama! Outside! The word, that impossible, beautiful word he'd been using more frequently, made several family members exchange glances. But Roman just smiled, the expression transforming his usually hard face into something almost gentle. Go ahead, we're done here anyway. They left through the terrace doors, escaping the weight of judgment and tradition for the garden beyond. Leo ran ahead toward a fountain where koi fish swam in lazy circles, and Aaliyah started to follow, but Roman caught her hand. Wait. She turned, and he pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her waist. Through the windows behind them, the family pretended not to watch while absolutely watching. Are you sure about this? Aaliyah asked quietly. Making me officially part of your world? There's no going back now. There was no going back the moment Leo kissed your cheek, Roman said. I just took a while to accept it. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. You could have run a dozen times. I could have taken the money I offered and disappeared into a new life somewhere safe. But you stayed, even when staying meant danger. Even when it meant facing Elena, facing death, facing everything I warned you about. I stayed because I love him, Aaliyah said simply. And because She stopped, the words catching in her throat. Say it. The same command he'd given her in the holding cell, but softer now. Because I love you too. Both of you. This strange, violent, impossible family. Roman kissed her then, slow and deep, a public claim that left no doubt about her status. When they broke apart, Leo was calling for them from the fountain, demanding they come see the fish, and they went together, no longer a Mafia don and a homeless girl, but partners, equals, family. Later, as the sun set over the city, they stood on the penthouse balcony. Leo had finally fallen asleep after the long day, safe in his room with Caruso posted outside. Aaliyah leaned against the railing, Roman's arms around her from behind, and looked out at the lights stretching to the horizon. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Taking me in? Your life would be simpler without me." "Simpler," Roman agreed. "Also emptier. Colder. Less worth living." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "You gave me back, my son. You gave me something I thought I'd lost when my wife died. A reason to build instead of just destroy. I didn't do anything special. I just saw a little boy who needed someone to stay. That's what made it special." Roman turned her to face him, his scarred hands gentle on her face. "In my world, everyone has an angle. Everyone wants something. But you just wanted to help. No agenda, no manipulation, just..." He searched for words. "Just goodness. Real, stubborn, inconvenient goodness." Aaliyah smiled. "Is that your way of saying I'm naive? It's my way of saying you're exactly what this family needed." He pulled her closer, and they stood together in the cooling night air, two people from impossible worlds who'd somehow found each other. The queen of the underworld. That's what they're calling you now. I heard. I think they mean it as an insult. Let them. Roman's smile was sharp and proud. Queens don't apologize for their thrones. Inside, Leo stirred in his sleep and called out softly, not in distress, just checking they were near. Aaliyah started to go to him, but Roman beat her there, scooping his son up and bringing him to the balcony. Leo blinked sleepily, then settled against Roman's shoulder with his small hand reaching for Aaliyah's. They stood like that as the city lights blazed below. A killer, a survivor, and a broken child they'd healed together. Not a traditional family by any measure. Not safe, not simple, not anything the world would approve of. But theirs. Absolutely, fiercely, impossibly theirs. And in the end, that was the only thing that mattered. Moral lesson. Sometimes the most valuable things in life come wrapped in rags rather than riches. Aaliyah arrived at Roman's door with nothing, no credentials, no connections, no power, yet she possessed what money couldn't buy: authentic compassion and the courage to stay when staying was dangerous. True worth isn't measured by what you own, but by what you are willing to sacrifice for those you love. But Leo didn't need another expensive nanny with perfect qualifications. He needed someone who saw past his trauma to the wounded child beneath. Roman didn't need a politically advantageous marriage. He needed someone who valued his son's life more than her own survival. The story also reminds us that judgment based on circumstance rather than character is a dangerous mistake. Everyone dismissed Aaliyah because of her poverty, yet she proved more loyal than any of the vetted professionals. Elena had every advantage: beauty, breeding, education, but her sense of entitlement made her cruel and treacherous. The lesson is clear. Character reveals itself not in comfort, but in crisis. When the bullets flew, when the choices were life or death, Aaliyah became a shield while others ran. Finally, the story teaches that family isn't defined by blood or law, but by who shows up when the world falls apart. Leo called Aaliyah Mama, not because of biology or paperwork, but because she was the one who stayed. Real belonging is earned through presence, sacrifice, and love, not inherited through birthright or purchased with wealth.